start to talk, one of the things lawyers fear the most is losing their voice. And I may lose it. I'm trying not to. I think the red wine helped a little bit. But I've been nursing a sinus infection for a week, and hopefully getting better. Anyway, in 1988, I was the immediate past president of the club. And at that time, my father was finishing his second career, which was as a clothing salesman with a business in Santa Barbara known as the White House, which was a
White House,
which was a clothing shop, which is now the I think the Men's Warehouse. And he said, I don't have a lot of hobbies, and I don't want to stay at home every day and drive your mother nuts. So any ideas? And I said, you know, how about a history of the club, which is what he loved to do anyway. He got into the minutes of the club, went back to 1919. One of the important functions of the club, Linda, as you know, is secretary. Secretaries keep minutes. And he did all of his research based, well, several other things in addition to that, but mostly based upon the minutes that he researched from the beginning of the club. I put on the piano a picture of this, what this structure looked like in 1919. Actually, it was built way before that, and it was called Calkins Castle. Here's a little blurb about Calkins Castle. This home, built for James W. Calkins about 1878, was located at 1332 Santa Barbara Street. The house was remodeled top to bottom in 1922 in the Spanish colonial revival style, and today is the home of the University Club. The look of the original building was apparently a matter of taste. One critic called it a monstrosity of towers, battlements, bay windows, porticos, and scroll work. Yet a reporter for the Morning Press in 1881 wrote, "The house was unsurpassed for beauty by any residence in the city." This is in the old Victorian type style. It is built after they call it Elizabethan style of architecture, and those familiar with the pleasant peculiarities of that style will find them all reproduced in this beautiful home. That was a description of Calkins Castle, which you'll see that picture over there. So anyway, talking about the founding of the club, in 1919, there were gentlemen in Santa Barbara who were university or college graduates who desired to form an organization for themselves to meet and have lunch and confer and perhaps even share business information. Among the people who were the original founders are some names that I don't think they're going to mean a lot to a lot of you, but maybe they will if you see some of the historical landmarks. One was C.L. Phelps, a Stanford graduate, temporary chairman of the committee that met at the Belvedere Hotel on March 29, 1919. There are a lot of other people, but I won't mention them because it wouldn't ring a bell. But one name I will mention, because my father told me this, Dr. Benjamin Bakewell, a UC graduate, was the doctor who delivered my father in 1916. C.L. Phelps, Clarence Phelps, think of Phelps Hall out at the university. These are all prominent Santa Barbans, and they met and decided to form the University Club. The incorporation was completed on September 24th, 1919. The first site that they considered for a clubhouse was the De La Guerra Mansion on East De La Guerra Street, but it was ruled out because it had needed extensive alterations. The second site that they considered was a residence over at 25 East Mitchell Terrain. All of this is close by. That's the present site of the Notre Dame School. On June 20th, 1919, this site was selected as a site and a 6-month lease was signed for $200 a month. Membership fees for this new organization were as follows. Initiation fee, $25. If you're 5 years out of college, you paid $1 a month. 10 years out of college, you paid $2 a month. 10 years out of college, after 10 years out of college, you paid $3 a month. Daily lunches. This will blow your mind. Breakfast, 35 cents. Lunch, 50 cents. Dinner, 75 cents. Room rentals, $20 a month. I should mention that at the beginning, it was always contemplated that the University Club would be renting rooms. And we did until, I think, into the 1970s, maybe even the early 80s. But for reasons that I will explain later, that had to be stopped. Well, a little interesting anecdote, and if you don't mind, I will do anecdotes from time to time because I'm up here and I've got the mic. One of my recent clients, a former president of the University Club, Dr. Hugh Snyder, I've done some legal work for him recently, and he loved to come to my office. Why? Because it used to be his residence. Now, mind you, my office is probably, if at all, 100 square feet. But it was his, when he first came to town, he rented space there. As did Jerry Beaver, I was informed. So.
$20?
They don't have, let's see, what is the room rental? $20 a month for the room rentals. The necessity after they formed the organization was to find a permanent meeting place. They wanted to actually acquire property. So a site on East Korea Street was recommended, which is adjacent to the recreation center, but that was rejected. The lease on this the property over here at 25 East Mitchell Traina was extended. Then in 1921, the University Club Holding Company was formed to undertake the responsibility of seeking the new clubhouse by means of a stock subscription fund. Apparently the Public Benefit Corporation at that point couldn't acquire property, but they had to form a separate holding company to start acquiring the property. In May of 1922, the Calkins Castle was offered as a possible site. And this is the building we're in today. So the property was purchased, are you ready for this? For $27,000. So that was by the holding company, the University Club Property Holding Company. So that holding company then leased the property to the University Club for $300 a month. It needed a lot of alteration, so that's when I read to you earlier from a different article. It was changed from that, what it looked like in that picture over there, to this Spanish Revival type of architecture. Formal opening of the clubhouse took place on March 10th, 1923. On March 15th, 1926, the club members were advised by their board that it was time to start purchasing from the holding corporation the stock they held as owners of the property. The total stock issued was 1,210 shares. By June 1927, the University Club had acquired by purchase or gift 550 shares. So it hadn't really acquired the property yet. I'll get to that part later. By that time, bi-weekly dinners were started for members, families and guests every other Thursday starting August 26, 1926. The price for those dinners, $1.25 a person. Now, the 1920s and the 1930s were a very interesting time for the University Club. On June 29th, 1925, my father was 9 years old. He used to give speeches about this too. That's how much he was into history. An earthquake, 6.2 magnitude, hit Santa Barbara. It pretty much devastated the town. I don't know how many of you actually saw the exhibit that was done at the Santa Barbara Historical Society. It was fascinating because they had a lot of pictures of the earthquake from the old days. The University Club building withstood this timber magnificently. Some repairs were necessary, but none were really severe. So what they put together back in 1922, they did right. So fortunately, the building that we're in today survived. Now here's something, I have to read this directly from my father because he had a certain, you have to know, my father was in the liquor and wine business most of his life. He had a business down in Anacapa and Delaware where I had my law office for over 20 years. Of some interest, particularly to those of us who occasionally like to indulge in a sip of the grape or a jigger of John barleycorn, were the Prohibition years of 1919 to 1933, when temperance was the rule of the day. Legal liquor was sold only by prescription. Now, this is still my father speaking. I am sure that many acute illnesses occurred here at the University Club, necessitating urgent care. What with a predominant medical profession member always at hand. Also, there was always the local bootlegger. Anyway, that's pretty much how they handled it. I think another thing they did, although he didn't put it in the minutes, is they would invite members of law enforcement. Occasionally the judges. Following the repeal of Prohibition in 1933, the club became licensed to dispense alcoholic beverages, starting with beer and wine. In 1934, plans were launched for the addition known as the tap room. The board was authorized to secure a loan to accomplish that. Big deal, $2,000. But I guess that was a lot of money then. Anyway, the tap room, as I understand it, is where the billiard room is now. So in 1937, following the addition of the tap room, culture returned to the club. A library was added to the original club building as a memorial to Frederick Saltonstall Gould. Does anybody know who Frederick Saltonstall Gould was? He was a relatively famous artist. And some paintings here, I understand, because they were donated by his widow, are his. Anyway, Mrs. Gould presented the club with several of his paintings, and she also contributed many books for the library. I don't know where those books are, because as I look in the library today, all I see is a bunch of old, useless law books, which I understand are supposed to be, quote, decorative, unquote. The 1930s were lean years also because of the Great Depression. Resignations outnumbered new memberships. It made it very difficult for the club to survive, but it did survive because it had conservative and diligent management and of the board of directors. Then World War II started, and my father could not find minutes. He says here, minutes from September of 1941 to October 46 were missing. Well, that's because nobody was taking them. And the reason for that is we have only one president and not too many other active people, because most of the gentlemen who were members of the club, being college graduates, had gone into the military and were commissioned as officers. So during the war years, there's only one person in this room who's going to remember this, and that's Dr. Dobbs back here. The president during that time was Dr. Charles Preuss, whose office and home was directly across the street here. Oh, incidentally, the members who were in the military, their dues were waived as long as they were in the military. In 1941, Dr. Preuss, in 1940, he became president of the University Club for as my father puts it, brief period of time, from 1940 to 1945. The club was in desperate shape at that point. It had survived the Depression, but now there were very few members. There was a lot of deterioration of the facility. There was a big necessity to keep things going and do maintenance. So Dr. Bruce installed a slot machine to assist in the funding. He authorized the installation of a one-armed bandit. So that was the way that money was generated to take care of maintenance. However, even in those days, we had what we still have today, the judge's table. So Dr. Bruce was called over to the judge's table one day, and he was told that this device was totally illegal and he had to get it out of here. But Dr. Bruce kept it just long enough to take care of raising the revenue to take care of the maintenance issues. Dr. Bruce was also instrumental, with the aid of another member, attorney Ted Canfield, in acquiring, on behalf of the University Club, the ownership of the property from the University Club Holding Company. And they got it at a very substantial discount because it was the war years and things were not appraised too high. We were very fortunate for that, to have this facility, which originally cost $27,000. The club at that time was also in possession of an off-sale liquor license. Now, I don't know if any of you know what an off-sale liquor license means. On-sale means you're selling drinks. Off-sale means you can sell bottles to the public. Well, at that time, the Alcoholic Beverage Control controlled the price of off-sale liquor to the extent, remember this is just right after the war, so it made no sense to keep that license, but those licenses were valuable. So the license was sold, and in order to generate money to help pay a lot of the debt that the club had during the war years. So thanks to Dr. Bruce, who took over running the club basically during the war years, we survived. I should say Dr. Bruce continued as a member till he died, and he died way close, almost to 100 years old. And he was one of the few members at that time that had keys to the club, because it was across the street. I think Joe remembers Dr. Bruce. And he was a man who always spoke his mind. I mean, if he had an opinion, you knew it real quick. After the war, and after the soldiers, the officers came back, who were members of the club, got back into the club, we got into a major expansion in the 1950s. In June of 1952, these are little anecdotes, the dues were increased $3 a month to further assist.
Red wine here, please. Yeah, more wine.
To further assist in, helping with the maintenance issues and the additions that they were contemplating. Resident member paid $750 a month. Director member $750, junior member $375, clergy $4.50, non-resident $3. But this is interesting, the total numbers of paying members in 1952, was 283. It's about where we are now, isn't it? Give or take. Anyway, in 1953, plans were made for the Building Progress Committee, which is the committee that they created, probably ad hoc, to relocate the bar, change the present bar into a billiard room. All of this happened. Convert room 1. Remember, there were residences here. Room 1 was downstairs. Convert room 1 into a ladies' lounge and toilet facility. Also proposed was a realignment of the tennis court so as to prevent a true corner in the proposed additions. You ever wonder why there's a cement portion of our asphalt parking lot? And you drive in, maybe you don't even think about it, but there's a portion that's flat and cement, and then the rest of it's asphalt. That was a tennis court. In fact, I remember when it was a tennis court, but it didn't last too much longer after I joined. Because people needed room to park, and this is where it comes into the further progress of the 1950s, because the club became a hot item. They needed more parking. In August of 1954, the club acquired a property next door at 216 East Sola Street. We don't own it anymore. It was ultimately sold for other improvements that we did. The total purchase price for that dwelling, which is right next door here, was $15,000. The first tenants of that, is Louise here?
He left.
First tenants were the club manager,
Whoops.
and a man named Sam Kramer. Now, Sam Kramer was the founder and manager of the Santa Barbara National Horse Show, which is a big deal now even. But he was the original founder of it back in the 30s. A little anecdote there, my grandmother was his bookkeeper. And when I was born, Sam Kramer gave me a silver cup with my name on it from Sam Kramer. That's not in my father's narrative, I just remember that. Not that I remember that he gave it to me when I was born, I remember asking about it.
That's your mother's bookie?
Anyway, the expansion took place in the late 50s, and we got the bar and grill room, we got air conditioning, we got a heating system. In the fall of 1958, the club was all spruced up and ready to be used again. Then we get into the 1960s, and it's kind of a status quo period of time. In the early 1960s, the need for additional parking became necessary. The city traffic department was enforcing parking more strictly downtown, so on-site parking was becoming very important. So in order to accomplish that, the club acquired Block 88, which was a vacant lot just south here, for $50,000. See, things are going up now, right? And it became parking. In January of 1964, additional property fronting on Santa Barbara Street was acquired for the purchase of the C.P. Benedetto property at 1316B Santa Barbara Street. That was a little house. The house was rented out and the club got the income from it. In May of 1964, the board decided to pay off the East Sola Street, that's the house next door, pay the loan off. In March of 65, the need for more parking was determined to be extremely important, so plans were made to remove the house at 1316 Santa Barbara Street. And that was done, and so now we have our big parking lot. The 1970s up until the early 1980s are called the Dick Hecker years, and again, the only person in this room besides me who remembers that is Joe Dobbs. Richard Hecker was our manager for over 10 years. It was another status quo period of time. The club did well enough to pay off the mortgage. So in June of 1979, the club held a burning of the mortgage party. You were there, and I was there. Okay, now you're getting into, it's relevant to Joe and me. However, having said that, just paying off the mortgage because, you know, we had the financial ability to do that didn't solve the problem because the club needed a whole lot of maintenance. Things were, you know, after all those years deteriorating, and the city started to get on our case about needing a new kitchen because we were getting cited for, we had 50 violations. In June of 1984, the Board of Health, upon inspection of the kitchen, cited 50 violations. most long-standing existence. The board was given 10 days to advise them of the commencement date of the reconstruction of the kitchen. President Dr. Joe Dobbs and Charles Watson, who's a civil engineer, were authorized by the board to take the appropriate steps necessary to advise the Board of Health as to when this new kitchen would be completed. Now, there's a little side note here. We didn't have the money. But, timing-wise, very interestingly, in 1979, a group known as the Santa Barbara Associates had approached the club to be affiliated. In late 1990, late 1980, we were in serious discussions with them. These talks continued for a couple of years. Finally, in 1982, the University Club was authorized to commence real serious negotiations. And on June 9th, 1983, President Wally Finger, called a special meeting of the board. I was on the board at that time. I went on the board in 1980. And a motion was passed to add a section to our bylaws that says, see how simple it is, any words in these bylaws referring to the masculine gender shall include the feminine.
I was a charter member. Santa Barbara Associates.
So, knowing that the city is breathing down our neck, 89 applications from members of the associates were submitted. They all came in as members. They contributed immediately over $26,000. And the 89 new members makes a huge difference in your budget. So we were able to go forward with this kitchen remodel, which was... Thank you, ladies. This was very significant.
I believe some men quit the club at that time.
We had several of our senior citizen members who said this is a men's club only, and they just quit. However, having said that, we offered one of them, a very prominent person, whose name I won't mention, he's deceased, but he might remember. We offered him an honorary membership at that point, and he did come back, but he didn't live much longer after that. But we did have those who did not come back, and that was very sad. However, we got 89 new members, and we lost maybe 3 or 4, so, you know. Now, all the financing details as to how we did the kitchen remodel and the loan that we got to initiate that are in the handout. I mean, all of what I'm doing here is from my father's narrative. There's a handout on the piano over there, which is basically the whole timeline that he did, the history that he did, so you can take it home with you. I don't want to get into the financial details. It was very complicated. We had a partnership on the house next door, which we owned at that point. Essentially, it was a partnership formed for lenders to lend money so that we could pay off the construction loan and get a permanent financing from Santa Barbara Bank and Trust, which we got. And you're not going to believe the interest rates, but this was the mid-'80s. 10.5% interest rate.
That was low.
So anyway, that takes us up through the end, or the middle 80s. Since then, my father's narrative ended in 1989. We have the new kitchen. We have the bar, which has been redone very recently. We're in good financial shape today. All of the presidents are shown in that handout that you have over there, I think up through 2009. The others, you can see the pictures out there in the Rogues Gallery. Do you have any questions at this point? I won't pretend to know everything, but I can tell you a hell of a lot past 1980. Most of that information before that comes from my father's narrative. Yes?
So the house next door was sold when?
The house next door, we were in a financial pinch. Maybe Joe can help me with this. We were in a financial pinch, I think in the mid to late 80s, and we needed to raise money for some remodeling. So we had a necessity to sell the house next door. And we had a beautiful, anybody know anything about art? William Wendt, W-E-N-D-T. We had a beautiful William Wendt painting that hung right here that we should have kept. I wish we hadn't sold it. Probably worth $500,000 today, but we did sell it. But we had to liquidate things in order to stay alive.
Yeah.
So when did the rooms turn into offices upstairs?
The rooms upstairs, we had some rather upsetting situations. We had several smokers, and we had one that fell asleep smoking and almost burned the place down. So we felt at that point it was not safe to have residents in here anymore. So we terminated all of the residences and started running the offices as daytime offices. We don't believe anybody is spending the night here. I know I haven't. But we had some suspicions several years ago about one of our members. But when I confronted him with it, he denied it. We've only had, in the almost 100-year history of the club, we've only had 2 expulsions other than for non-payment of dues. We do kick people out for that. We've only had 2 expulsions. One was in the 1950s. A member who was a prominent restaurateur in town was a card player, and the card room was where the library is now in those days. And he drank a lot, and he got into some vicious arguments with some of the members, which they thought was uncivil. So they went to the board and asked for him to be expelled, and he was expelled. So, but my father went through the minutes on that, and about several months later, he tendered a humble apology and said he would not offend again, and he was allowed back in, but, and the notation in the minutes was, with the denial of drinking privileges. And the other expulsion, and I won't get into the details, happened last year. But in almost 100 years, to have 2 expulsions for uncivil conduct is remarkable.
When was the main dining room added? Was that part of the expansion in the 1950s?
Yes. The club really always had dining. I just don't know exactly where in the 30s and 40s and 50s that it was. I remember coming here as a kid in the 1950s. My father joined the club in 1948 or 1949, and I remember that one of the big